to the Photography Pod, a show for both working professionals and enthusiast photographers alike. And here's your hosts, Steve Vaughan and Nick Church.
Hello again, and welcome to the Photography Pod, a photography podcast for both working professionals and enthusiast photographers alike. My name is Steve Vaughan, and once again, I'm here with my good mate, Nick Church. Nick, how you doing?
I'm very well, Steve. How are you? Hope everyone's well, listening as well. Been a pretty hectic couple of weeks, as I know you have as well. What have you been up to, Steve?
Well, finishing off weddings. So we've had a couple more weddings since the last show. And speaking of shows, I'm in a show. I'm in a musical, would you believe? So my wife and I have been involved in Banbury Operatic now, off and on for a number of years, and more off than on in recent years. But they're putting a show on right now, in fact, the end of this week. In fact, by the time the listener hears this, hopefully it'll all have been done and dusted. But it's a show called Kings and Queens. So it's just different songs from different musicals. And it's a bit of a fundraiser, really, because it's cheaper than putting on a whole show. But because I'm male and I've also got a pulse, and I can just about sing, I'm in demand because they're always short of men for these things. So every night this week we've had rehearsals and we're not quite ready, shall we say. So it's full dress rehearsal tonight, and that's why I haven't had a shave yet, because of stage makeup and stuff. It's a lot of fun, but it just kind of take over your life a little bit when it gets closer to show week. So I'll be kind of glad when it's over a little bit as well. But I was also away for a few days, a couple of days up in the Peak District, which I think we'll come back to later in the show. Spent a couple of days walking with one of the dogs. But you've been away, I think, as well, haven't you?
I went to Sicily, yeah. So it was...
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, it was lovely. Yeah, it was great weather and very much needed bit of sort of just R&R. It was good. Didn't go up Mount Etna. I wanted to, but it was, I figured... I looked at the options to go up there. It's really expensive. And I didn't have any of the kit I would need. I didn't quite realise you actually need decent walking boots and...
Yeah.
A big jacket, which when it's 30 degrees elsewhere, you don't really pack that in your luggage. But no, it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful place, beautiful food, scenes. I did actually take some photos, which is the first for a few years when I've been away. I was swimming we went on this boat trip, and it was to just down from Taormina, which is where the White Lotus was filmed. I don't know if you've seen that on Netflix. Yeah. So it's a little bay just down there. So I was snorkeling in there, so I love a bit of snorkeling. And I was thinking about it's right at the base of Etna, so it must have been historically all of the landscape formed when, through eruptions and so on. So I was thinking that lava must have been poured into this bay, and this bay probably formed by that lava. And as I did that, I suddenly became aware of like a bit of heat on my foot, and I thought, that's weird.
Wow.
Weird how the mind can trigger these kind of actual physical things. And then I felt at my hand and then my armpit. And then looked up and saw a shitload of jellyfish. So I was swimming with a load of jellyfish, and I picked up loads of stings all over all down one side. So I suddenly sort of got out of that area and got back in the boat, and had some nice sort of battle scars for. I'm
terrified of them. I've got a real phobia of jellyfish. Ever since I was a kid going on holiday to North Wales, I'm really, really frightened of jellyfish. Seriously.
They're only, these were they're called, and I googled them, and they're called there's a Latin name, but they're called mauve stingers, because they're just these tiny little unassuming looking things. Really packed quite a punch. And I was on the it's funny, on this boat there was myself and Dawn. There was a couple from Japan, a couple from Germany. There's probably about sort of 8-10 of us, and it's just really interesting to look at the dynamics of how everyone kind of socializes, things like that. Because I'm a complete introvert, right? So I really don't. My natural thing. It's not me saying I don't want to talk to anybody. It's just my natural place is I'm not going to start a conversation. It just doesn't occur to me. And looking around, some people were the same, and other people were fascinated by each other. They were all, and I thought that's really interesting how all like that, all slightly different, and. When I noticed it when I work with other photographers at weddings and things like that some of us are, when it comes to the sort of food bit, we always talk about what do you do at food time at a wedding, do you, this thing about sometimes you get invited to sit down with the guests, and loads of people go, oh, fantastic, I love chatting to people and all that.
No.
And I'm head in my hands thinking, oh no.
Anything but.
That's the time for me to sit down, have a little cry, and do some drone work. That's my thing, and recharge my social batteries. But we're all different, and I wonder how much that informs our the way that we shoot. Where when I see very immersive, like that, those sorts of wedding photographers that do very close work. They're with a couple there, and they're actually interacting with the couple. You can see their interaction in the photo, and it does actually translate through to the photos you've got, rather than
it does.
A more of a sort of setback, more documentary, sort of observational.
I think that's a whole topic for another show in the future. But I mean, we're much more. I mean, I'm not as extrovert as my wife. But after about 10 minutes, my wife will know everybody's life history, where they were born, what they do, where they went on holiday, and everything else. So we're probably much more in the battle kind of thing than yourself, really. But but if we're all the same, life would be boring, wouldn't it? Really,
exactly. But do you find that there's almost a you're right. This is way off topic. There's almost like a view that an introvert is in some way a negative trait, and in some ways it is socially, of course it is, but also it's just different, isn't it? I mean, an introvert needs their own, that they recover and recharge by a bit of their own, just their own time, a bit of peace and quiet. Whereas an extrovert, actually, it isn't that they don't need to do that; it's that they need to have that social interaction. They need that bit, whereas an introvert needs to be on their own, and it's just a different sort of thing that we actually have to do. And in fact, introverts in some situations that just consider that, it's great, I'm really chatting all that, but when you're chatting to a group of people, if you're an extrovert, if you're really chatty into a group of people, be very dynamic, there'll probably be someone in that group that's going, oh, this is really full on. I would quite like to have no social interaction at this point. And I think introverts are actually a bit more aware of that kind of thing than an extrovert might be. But
there is a whole psychology around this, isn't there? Really, and as you know, I spent most of my working life in sales and sales management. And as a salesperson, one of the things I found really difficult to do was selling to a very introverted person, because I'm an extrovert. But yet, and also surprisingly, some of the best salespeople I ever worked with, and still do actually, as in my training role, are introverts. They're not people who are not your archetypal salesperson, give to the gab, Mr. Charisma kind of people. They're people that are quite shy, but actually understand the process and understand what's involved, really. So, but I think we should come back to photography, because I think listeners might think we've joined the Watch Psychology Monthly or something like that. Yeah,
absolutely. We've got Tesni Ward. So Tes is a fantastic wildlife photographer, and
absolutely
check out her website, tesniward.co.uk. It's just beautiful shots of not just in the UK, but shots all over the world as well. Yeah, so just fabulous photos, focusing on not just the more extravagant animals, or the more, the sort of more money shot type animals, but also just more common varieties as well, which is really beautifully framed, beautifully coloured shots. So, Tez, thanks for joining us today. It's really nice to have you on the show. Just as we start, we normally just ask people to go through a bit of their background. Would you like to do that? Just give us a sort of potted history of your photography and who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So, my name is Tesni. I feel like I need to introduce myself as an introvert after the conversation you just had.
Yeah,
introvert. So, yes, I'm based in the Peak District. I've been lucky enough, I can't speak this morning, to live in the area for over 15 years. And I've gradually moved closer and closer to the point where I'm now actually in the Peak District. So I've been doing wildlife photography full time for nearly 9 years now. It's all exciting in the background. So I will hit my 9-year anniversary, so to speak, in February.
Wow.
And I can't complain too much. It's pretty enjoyable as a job.
Fantastic. And I know that you're an ambassador for the OM system, which was Olympus back a few years ago. So how did that come about, that partnership with OM for their cameras and lenses?
It was one of those occasions where it's just right place, right time. So I had just spent a lot of money on photography and a big trip. So I depleted most of my savings at that point. I worked in sales, so I worked in medical sales, and I had the potential to earn a lot of money. So I thought, I can justify spending this on something I enjoy. We can all say that, photography, once you start doing it slightly more seriously, it costs a lot of money.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
So I justified it that I really enjoy it and I can earn that money back. But I was made redundant from my job a week before I was due to go on the big trip. And it was a bit of okay, this isn't ideal. So went on the trip, was umming and ahhing, what am I going to do? Am I going to go back and start doing job interviews and all of that fun stuff? And in the end, I decided, no, I'm not. I'm going to try and be a wildlife photographer and see how it goes.
Good for you.
And I didn't make any formal announcement or anything like that. But a week after being back home, Olympus contacted me and said, "We see you're at the photography show. So are we. Do you want to chat?" I was like, "Yeah, go on then. You're offering me a free cuppa, so who says no to that?" And it kind of just carried on from there.
Fantastic. God, that's the sort of email I'd like to receive. How did you get to being the recipient list of that sort of email from Sony or whoever? That's that amazing. What does that actually involve then? So being an ambassador to that brand. Now, presumably you shoot for Olympus. I used to. That was my first camera system, was an Olympus EM5. So that was how my entry point into photography. Which is that shows that I haven't been doing photography for very long at all, really. What does it involve to be an ambassador, so our listener can sort of get a feel of what that means?
It's a constantly evolving and changing position. So sometimes you're really busy doing a lot of work for them, doing talks, doing events, doing workshops. Occasionally, I've been incredibly fortunate that they've sent me abroad to do projects and various bits and bobs. And then you have quiet periods where obviously you're still technically working with them, but you're not doing any official events or anything. So it's a really, really great bunch of people. They're an amazing team. They're so involved with the photography community. So they're not just we're a brand behind a wall. You never get to see us or speak to us. They're right in there with the community, which is amazing. And sometimes I'm involved with that. So pretty nice all around.
Awesome. I think, Steve, you correct me. I think Fuji are a bit like that as well in terms of how their outreach and the collaborations they have with photographers is a bit more open than some other brands.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Fuji ambassador, nowhere near close to being one. I don't shoot Fuji anymore, but I know obviously people like Kevin Mullins who have been, and now Emily Renier, who's a good friend of ours, and we know the Fujifilm marketing team. I know the marketing manager very well, and I think they are like that. And my understanding with the guys you work with as well, Tesni, is a similar kind of thing. I've interacted with them a little bit. I did for a while loan some equipment from them. And I've got a question just around that, because obviously the brand's gone through a change, because it's gone from being Olympus to OM System, when I guess Olympus as a company exited the photography business. I know Olympus from my sales, because they're obviously a medical device manufacturer. That's what they're well known for. Did that change for you at all? Did anything become different because of that?
The team shrunk a little bit. So obviously, when somebody new takes over, they like to put their stamp on it and try and make necessary adjustments where needed. So the team is a hell of a lot more busy than they used to be, because they've obviously shrunk in size and they've taken on more responsibility. So the relationship is always changing, even since before they were taken over. But that's one thing that I actually kind of enjoy. It's always fresh. It's always new. You never quite know what to expect. So
I wonder if that shrinking of a team, Tez, is partly responsible for using ambassadors to do things like creating videos, creating content, all of those other things, rather than having an in-house team that are content creators doing it for a much larger organization would have. Maybe that's linked.
It's a funny one, because I'm not sure if the timing fully lines up, but when they were taken over and they shrunk the staff team, they also shrunk the ambassador team. So, yes, they were just trying to streamline ever so slightly. So, they obviously also went down they're focusing more on nature photography.
Sure.
So they streamlined it a little bit. So as ambassadors, we are there if they need us, but they're also happy to just leave us to do our own thing until we are needed again. So there's never any pressure. I don't get a paycheck at the end of every month or anything like that. But it's nice to kind of have that flexibility. And if there's some work, they'll let me know. If I'm available, awesome. And if there's none, until we meet again, and we just get on with our own bits and bobs.
That's a super relationship there, really, because you've got the flexibility and the independence, haven't you, really? And but you've got the support there if you need it as well. Yeah.
So when I shot Olympus, it was. So are you shooting what's the main camera body? It used to be the EM1. I mean, what's that? What's the equivalent now, Tez?
It's OM1. So
OM1.
it's just
still
one.
the OM1. Yeah, so I didn't have the OM1 equivalent. That was because when I started it was similar to the position you're in before this. That before that type with OM, where you think, can I justify? How much can I justify spending on something that doesn't currently have a way to generate income? But what I loved about the EM5 system was the size. And that must be a massive pro in terms of a wildlife or landscape photographer, of a smaller bit of kit for you to carry around.
Yeah, so when I switched, I wasn't looking to switch. And when you've invested a hell of a lot of money and time into your current system, it's a really big leap to then go, well, see you later. I'm going to something completely new that's going to take time to get used to, and it's going to cost me money. So it's really nice that I got a free loan for quite a few months so that I could just trial it. And I won't lie, when I did the initial change, it was such a huge jump from a flagship camera to, at the time, it was the EM1 Mark I, and it wasn't quite fit for purpose for what I needed it for. So it was a really difficult transition until they brought out the EM1 Mark II. And then all of a sudden they addressed the issues that I'd had. And then every new model, they keep improving, they keep up in the ante, so to speak. Because Olympus OM system, because they come from that medical side. And even when they were still part of Olympus, photography was a bit of fun for them. They already had the technology, they already had the optics. So they were just like, well, let's have a little bit of a play with some photography stuff. It was never meant to be a big money earner for them. So their lenses, their glass, in my opinion, are some of the best in the business. So there were just so many pros that just kept sort of swaying me over, and I'm a very happy girl.
So for the listener, I'm sure most listeners are aware that the Olympus uses a micro four thirds sensor size, which is half the size, Tez, from a full frame.
Yes. So 2 times crop.
Yeah. So a bit more than a crop,
APS-C type.
Yeah, APS-C. Yeah, so that's the combination of letters I was desperately searching for. So things do tend to be smaller. The lenses are smaller. The OM1 is still quite a sizable camera, but smaller than the equivalent. Certainly DSLR and mirrorless, sort of full frame mirrorless. What are the pros and cons from your side, from your point of view, Tez, of using that micro four thirds system?
So for me, there's several big pros and just one con that's left, and they can fix that very easily. So the pros, my people often refer to it as the big white lens. So my big lens, compared to my old big white lens, is a lot lighter, it's a lot smaller, and by the use of converters, I can get up to 2,000 millimeters of equivalent focal length.
Wow, amazing.
That's huge, and that gives me the ability to get images that otherwise you simply couldn't get. Now, sometimes there's the argument with some of the full frame, larger megapixel cameras, well, why don't you just crop? Now, I haven't entered competitions for quite a few years now, but I still follow the guidelines and rules that they set for entries, because I think it's just a good framework to follow. And they don't let you crop your image more than about 75%.
Oh, is that right?
So
wow.
it obviously, it does depend on the competition, but often that's one of the things that is stated. Don't clone things out. Don't go crazy adding skies in and unicorns in the background. And don't crop your image more than sort of 80, 70% of the full size. So yes, you can crop with a larger megapixel, but can you then, if you get an absolute worldie of an image, can you then enter that into some of the bigger competitions?
That's interesting.
I never
the
knew
answer is
that.
probably no.
It totally makes sense about adding things, removing things, and adding a unicorn. Which is why you don't see many unicorns in the world. What the wildlife
Funny
of
that,
the
isn't
year.
it? Yeah.
But cropping seems not like that doesn't seem in the same category to me. But if that's what it is, I mean, like there's so many photos, like famous photos, like I don't know, Che Guevara with his cap on. It's actually a pretty small crop from a much bigger image with loads of other people in it. That does seem.
But I guess it's back to getting it right in camera, really. If you get it right in camera first and foremost, really. I mean, I shoot with high resolution 61 megapixel cameras, but I'd still rather get the image properly exposed and properly sized in the camera if I could, really. And so I totally get the optical reach of the Micro Four Thirds system. Certainly, yeah, makes a lot of sense.
That reach must be very important to you, Tez, because looking at your portfolio, you do have a very, I mean, it's completely immersive shots, aren't they? The animals look like they're, I mean, to me, when I look through it, it just looks like the best of National Geographic over the last 20 years. It's just a really amazing shot. They're all so detailed. There's really close, really tight shots and interesting framing, which you're only going to be able to get. But that was one of my questions was going to be, how do you get those sorts of shots? And you've just answered that with these converters that give you such a massive reach.
The focal length is one of the tools that allow you to do that, because for certain images, I've finally got a couple of years ago a frame filling portrait of a fulmar, and I was hanging off a cliff. So I can't get any closer. So the only thing that I'm going to be able to do is crop or use a longer focal length. And my preference, just because I don't like to crop too much doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it at all. But from my experience with this camera, I've done comparative shots where I've either taken it without converters and I've cropped in, or I've used converters and I've tried to get the equivalent image and see which one's better. Mm-hmm. And 9 times out of 10, the converter images have been better. So,
interesting.
If I can achieve it in camera, and then I always look at processing as photography is a 3-step process. You take it, you edit it, and then you print it.
Yeah.
People take part in various stages. Some people are 3-stage. I'm a 2-stage. I've tried printing. I really struggle with it still. So I let somebody else who is far better at it do my printing for me.
Me too.
So I look at the processing stage as you've been in the mines. You've got some lovely little golden nuggets, but they're covered in clay. They're dirty. They've got some grit on them. When you're post-processing them, you're cleaning them. You're polishing them. It was still a golden nugget to begin with, but you're just bringing out that full potential.
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the things I remember from using converters, I don't know a converter at the moment, but I've played around with them in years gone by, is obviously you get the reach. You might lose a little bit of optical quality, but I guess these days that's probably negligible. But you do also lose some light, so you might go down. You might lose a stop or even 2 stops depending on the converter. So how do you manage that? Bear in mind, I guess we'll come on to this, but with the Micro Four Thirds sensor, I guess one of the things you want to do is keep the ISO reasonably low. How do you manage that?
So these days with the OM1 Mark 1 and the Mark 2, the high ISO performance is damn good. And also with the programs that are constantly evolving, things like, I prefer Topaz. I think Topaz is wonderful.
Yeah.
Lightroom denoise is getting really good as well.
Yeah.
High ISO shooting is a lot less of a concern these days.
Right.
So some of the big pros of the Micro Four Thirds, the image stabilization is exceptional. You can get up to 8.5 stops of stabilization.
Wow.
You pair that with the fact that it's lighter and smaller, so your hands aren't and your arms aren't, wibbly wobbly and quite as much to keep it still. And then this is a pro, but it's also a con. And I'll explain why. But the depth of field, if you took exactly the same composition with a full frame camera and a Micro Four Thirds camera, the depth of field will appear wider on the Micro Four Thirds. It's all to do with the focal length that you're having to use.
Yeah.
So you're able to get away with shooting wide open, but you're still getting the full subject in focus. You're not having to stop down and therefore lose even more light. So I regularly will handhold wildlife. I don't want it slower than a 500th of a second, but if you've got to do it, you've got to do it. And, I've done wildlife a half a second before. I've done it slower.
Gosh.
When we've had those wonderful northern lights in the UK, I've dangled out of my bedroom window and I've handheld 4-second images with a shorter lens.
Yeah.
But, I'm not setting up a tripod all awkwardly on the roof. So I just dangle it out and get the shot. So with all of the big benefits of the system, it means that losing a bit of light through a converter is worth it. It's worth the risk.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you do these projects that you're working on, wherever they may be, can you talk a bit about your process to getting into the location, how long do you spend waiting for the right shot or track? How do you find the birds? How do you track them and find where they're going to be? How does that work?
So one of the downsides to being a full-time photographer is you actually end up getting less time to do your own photography half the time. It's just got to pay them bills. So it can be difficult to put weeks aside to do projects. So I'm going to Madagascar in 3 weeks. Can't wait. It's going to be my first spell of just my own photography. I'm not running a tour. I'm out there with
Sounds amazing.
another great photographer, David Tipling. So we're literally just going out there to do photography. It's going to be great. When I'm doing the projects at home, and I'm kind of having to start from scratch because I've moved house in the past 5 months, I have all of these new locations accessible to me. And I haven't had the chance to go and check any of them out yet. I've not had the chance to go and walk my local routes, find new badger sets, find new locations. So I need to get the time to do that, find locations that are viable for photography so that then when the season is right, go and actually get the images. So quite often when I say I'm working a project and I'm year 3 into a pigeon project, it's long term because I might only get a day here or, if I have a day off, what's the chances of the conditions actually being good? And the light being good. I'm always thinking long term at the moment. But hopefully in the next few years, I'll be able to do less monetary work and more of just my own photography again. And just going out whenever I get the chance. The longer you're out there, the more likely you are to get the light, get the behavior, get the images you're after.
Yeah, that sounds really similar to I know you do some landscape photography as well, and landscape photographers often say that you just sometimes you take a day off work, whatever it is. If it's the wrong conditions, you either have to decide of just abandon it or just go ahead and accept that it's just not going to be the ideal shot, and it must be super frustrating when occasionally just things don't all line up in terms of the weather and the animals being there or the light being correct, and it's just completely sort of game over before it even starts. So your process would be in that case not to bother, to respect your own time and think, well, it's not worth getting a shot that you're not ultimately going to be happy with. You'd rather just delay that particular shoot until.
Personally, one of the biggest projects that I did was badgers, and sadly the badger cull put a swift end to that. Although I hope to take it up again as soon as possible. So when I was initially working with them, if I had an evening free, I was there. Rain, shine, I don't care, I'm there. And then as I started to develop the portfolio and I started getting the images, it was pointless going back in incredibly bad conditions where the light was just unworkable because I already had a body of work that I was happy with, and I was starting to be a lot more specific about the type of image I want, the behavior, the light. So, knowing that because I was working in a woodland, the light was already challenging even if the sun was out. There was no point me going if it's blustery and raining and miserable because the shutter speeds I'd have to work with were unworkable. Mm-hmm. The light was unworkable. So sometimes it's better to prioritize your time, recognize when it's better to just have a day off. Just have a day off and rest and relax, maybe do some processing, do some bits and bobs behind the scene and wait for the conditions to line up for the kind of image that you're after.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. The having conditions which aren't ideal can, certainly in my experience, does help a little bit because it makes you dig a bit deeper and suddenly think, oh, actually there is, you by finding a little pool of light where, you can actually get some beautiful shots, which on the face of it, you wouldn't have thought particularly that day. But if it's just grey and not ideal and the light's terrible, then it's just, like you say, your time's too important, really.
I think it's also the difference between, having to go out and take images because that's what your job is and that's how you make money and, doing it for fun. So I was up in the peaks a few weeks ago with one of our dogs just for a long weekend. My wife was enjoying herself in Florida and I got up at 5:30 to go up Parkhouse Hill to photograph Chrome Hill in the sunrise, and of course petered down with rain and cloudy and horrible, got nothing. But I still enjoy being out in the fresh air and having a walk with the dog. So, I guess it's all about what you're trying to achieve, really, isn't it? Really. And, if you're doing it for, because you need to get the image to make money, as opposed to, I'm not a landscape photographer, but I quite enjoyed messing around in the fields for a morning and doing a bit of walking with the dog, really. So, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think last time I did get up that early recently, but it was only to get a flight to Sicily. That was the only for a holiday.
Rub it in.
Before to do it voluntarily, I think it was 1989. I think there was a day that I got up that early.
Spot the former IT guy.
You've talked a lot about your passion projects and the things that you love to do, and that they take time. And something that's similar with landscape photographers as well is that wildlife photography, for most of you, however beautiful the work is and how talented you are, which you're definitely the case, is a difficult way to earn money to earn a business purely from that work alone. And then that's augmented with tours and workshops and so on. Now, I know you do some tours and they're extremely popular, and the feedback from your attendees is just phenomenal. Would you like to talk a bit about those and how they work?
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm doing tours and workshops, my photography it's not important at all. So occasionally I'll have my camera with me, but the thing that I enjoy most about it is when you get the opportunity to introduce somebody who really wants to see a certain species. Mountain hares are the big thing that I do in winter.
Gosh.
When they see it for the first time and you just see their face light up and they're just so excited, and that is such an enjoyable part of the job for me. We are so disconnected from nature as a society, and I think it's really important for people to get outdoors, even just for a walk, a dog walk, just to sit in the woods and listen to the bird song.
Absolutely.
And certain wildlife that we have can be quite difficult to find, difficult to photograph. So when people entrust me to try and get them into those positions to see that wildlife and photograph it, the excitement when it's over and they've got a huge smile on their face and they're going through their images, and you can't put a price on that. I absolutely love being able to give people that opportunity.
How does it work if it is a flat day, or for whatever reason the mountain hares have gone on holiday and they're not around? How does that work?
But the mountain hares are quite specific. If there's low cloud and it's a bit of a microclimate where I do it, I will try and cancel. I'll basically say, look, this is not going to work. We can't see more than 10 meters in front of us. Even if we somehow manage to find a mountain hare, the photos are not going to be good. So I'll always try and, wherever possible, postpone, reschedule. Sometimes people can't reschedule, and then I'll give them the option of, we can still try for the mountain hares, but it's going to be a really difficult day. But we have other options. Do you want to go and try this? Do you want to, we can go lower down into the valley. We're not necessarily seeing the species you're here for, but you're more likely to get some good images, have a good day. And you might find that the species I take you to see, which is typically red grouse, but sometimes I'm flexible, depends on what's around. But I actually realize that red grouse are awesome as well. So absolutely. I always try and be flexible. Sometimes the weather's just not going to work out.
What's the longest you're waiting? This is actually a question that one of the listeners sent in. What's the longest that you've waited for that shot? Now, whether that's on a tour or on your own thing, at what point do you say, right, let's just knock it on the head? It's not working.
I'm still waiting. I've been doing photography for 12, 13 years now. The thing with wildlife is you can have a level of trust with that animal, so that animal's comfortable around you. You get the natural behavior. You can get the best light in the world, but then that species does everything that you want behind a bush, behind a tree, in the only dark spot in the valley or in the woods. There is always an element of luck, and the more you work with a certain species, the more you see potential images that you could achieve. Mm-hmm. And you're just waiting for it. You're waiting for everything to line up. So there was one badger photo. It was a badger called Lissa. She sat on her rear end and she's preening. So her legs are up in the air. Her arms are kind of flopping down. Golden light, beautiful. I'd been waiting for that for years. And I'd seen the behavior almost every single evening, but the light was always bad, or there was a badger in the way or a bush. There was always an element stopping me from getting the image. And when I finally managed to get it, I was over the moon. I was so chuffed that everything had finally lined up.
No SD card. No.
I would have died.
Have you had the opposite problem of animals that are inquisitive and actually come towards you and then they're not exhibiting their natural behavior?
Sometimes it does happen. Sometimes it's location specific. There are places where people feed wildlife, so they just associate you with food and they're climbing up your legs. There are scenarios where wildlife is just so habituated to people, they don't care that you're there, and sometimes they'll come up and check you out. I don't mind it as long as it's not putting the wildlife at risk. I always think that when it comes to photography, the wildlife and their welfare is the number one priority. Your photography is always secondary.
Absolutely.
But, sometimes when you have habituated wildlife, I like doing photography at country parks. I don't like the number of people there, but the reality is the wildlife just doesn't care anymore. So you don't have to worry about sitting in a hide for 10 weeks to get your shot. You can just sit on the water's edge and wait for the right moment. So, yeah, sometimes it happens. I don't mind it too much. If it was a brown bear or something, I'm going to mind. But luckily, we don't have those in the UK.
So if the listener is interested in your tours, where would they find out more about that?
If you literally just pop onto my website, you can Google Tesni Ward, and it will be the first option. I've got a full page with photography workshops and tours, or you can always just drop me an email or message me on something like Instagram, and I'm always happy to talk more about it.
I can guarantee my wife will be in touch.
Totally
She'll
fine.
be desperate to come and hang out with you for the day, definitely. So if somebody listened to you, and it's been fascinating listening to you, Tesni, but if somebody's listening to you now thinking, I'd really would like to have a go at being a wildlife photographer. I photograph other things, but I really would like to go and have a go at being a wildlife photographer. What would be your sort of top 3 or 4 tips to them, starting out? What would you say?
Don't instantly go for the difficult stuff. Don't be thinking, right, I want to photograph eagles, I want to photograph foxes, I want to photograph whales.
Right.
Start simple. Start at your local park with waterfowl, mallards, geese, swans. You want to work on developing your understanding of the species, understanding what kind of compositions and light works best. You don't want to then add on top of that, I also have to worry about fieldcraft and hiding, and you can really overdo it, and it's just overload. So start simple. Start with stuff that's not scared of you. Start with stuff that's accessible, so you don't have to be taking long road trips for a 30-second viewing of a pine marten, for example. And then just persevere, keep going. Even today, my priority when I'm out taking images is portfolio. From day one, it's just portfolio, thinking about, a nice body of work, a nice selection of images with variety that I can put into a portfolio. Not that I've ever had a physical portfolio, but it's just think about putting together that selection of images that complement each other. And then it will just kind of evolve from there.
Great advice. Yeah, great advice.
And if you want a bit of local wildlife, Steve, you can always, a good place for wildlife is always go down to your nearest Wetherspoons. There's always quite a lot going on there.
Yeah, I tend to avoid.
I would agree.
It's a bit of fun. Nothing against, I have got, let's not get onto that.
I've got a lot against Wetherspoons.
Let's not get onto it. I think you wouldn't find too much disagreement here, Taz.
Smashing.
Well, that's been absolutely fascinating. I knew it would be, and we could talk for ages. I know I'm conscious of time. It's just been such a great interview, and thanks so much for being so generous with your time for everyone listening. Right, well, we're going to go through just a couple of other bits and pieces. We've got a bit more to talk about. Now, if you're happy to hang on, that'd be great. There might be something that you can that we might come and get your expert opinion on. So, Steve, news this week.
Bless you.
What have you noticed around going on in the
big news I noticed in the industry was the death and then the resurrection of Rotalight. So do you use Rotalights? You got any Rotalights?
No, I haven't. No, I completely Godox.
Okay. So Rotalight is a UK company based in High Wycombe, about 30 miles down the road from here. And they're best known, obviously, for their round LED lights, hence the name. UK made, UK designed, and we've got 3 of the Neo 3s. They're about the size of a dinner plate. No, like a dinner plate, a side plate. And I bought them at the photography show last year, mainly because it was a good deal, and you know what we're like for good deals. And it came in a box of 3 with rechargeable battery stands and everything, and effectively half price. And I love them. I mean, they're not flash replacements. They're an alternative, really. And things like dance floor work, they can be great. And I've used them for Zoom calls and things, though I'm not using them today, really.
Well, they've got a massive. But you know, they're used a lot in films, right? I mean, in the film industry.
Completely. Yeah, they're bigger ones. Their bigger lights are used in places like Pinewood Studios and things as well. But I guess their problem always is that they've got a UK manufacturer and a UK cost base, and they're up against, you know, as you mentioned, the Chinese brands, really. So
and the problem they've also got is their curious choice of specifying sizes around crockery items. Right, because you said it's a side plate size. I mean, is that do they do like a? It's
purely my analogy, nothing to do with red light. That's just by the way my warp mind works. But they announced this week that they were going into administration, and that obviously is not good news for the employees and things. And I'm in their user group, and then they announced within a couple of days that actually that it looked like the directors had come to some kind of arrangement and bought the brand. So it seems like they are going on, but as a new entity.
Oh, amazing.
But what their business model seems to be now is purely direct. So obviously they used to sell through the camera shops, but now it seems like they're only selling directly on roadtolight.com. But if you are interested, they're listed. There's some pretty good deals, really, pretty much half price and all their stuff, because I suppose they haven't got the reseller's margin there to factor in. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, as a UK company, it would be great if they can survive and prosper, really.
Absolutely.
It's difficult enough to make money in this country and to make things in this country, and it would be great to see them go through. I think they're really nice people. I really enjoyed talking to them at the photography show. I think the products are great. And
yeah, I know you thought very highly of them. I saw you at the photography show with your goodies that you'd picked up. The only thing I saw industry-wise this week was Fujifilm stating that they believe that younger people aren't really practicing photography in the same way, and this is why they're creating camera bodies like the XM5, which actually it's like a V100 Fujifilm?
The X100, you mean?
X100, yeah. So it's similar in some ways to that. There's certain features in there for vloggers, like there's a portrait mode and it crops to Instagram, and so it's very much targeted at being able to get content directly onto Instagram and that sort of thing. And they're kind of realizing that the younger creators and photographers are using things like clips and content rather than classic photography. I just thought it was an interesting thing. I don't think that that's a concern. I don't think that young people aren't taking photos, because of course they are. There's a continual flow of new photographers joining the industry, certainly in weddings and commercial photography. But that's just an interesting area that certainly we've seen things like in the wedding industry, content creators becoming much more popular and much more common now. They have traditionally had iPhones on gimbals, and maybe that's going to be a sort of logical extension of they're going to start using that sort of kit.
I think it's an inevitable trend, and I know Fujifilm and Sony. I mean, how many vlogging cameras does Sony have? And I can't even work out all the different model numbers. Is that something that's impacted the OEM system brand, Tesni? Are you seeing that happening in their hardware as well? That move towards the sort of hybrid content creation kit?
I would say, from what I've seen, no, they are still focusing primarily on naturey outdoor photography.
Right.
And that in itself, I would argue, has the potential to drive more young users to the brand.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I mean, their cameras are great video cameras, aren't they? Because you mentioned the IBIS and everything in them as well. So, interesting. I think it's, the archetypal late middle-aged white man dragging his big rucksack around the cameras, the photography show, there are less of them around, for obvious reasons.
Well, I thought that was something really encouraging in the show last year. I know, Tesni, you were presenting there. Well, if you're there this year, I know we're not allowed to mention yet about who speakers are. If you're there this year, then we'll catch up, have a coffee. What I noticed was a lot of a younger general demographic than previous years.
It's going to be a good
A
thing.
lot more balance with more female photographers than I've seen in previous years. More male models rather than just a load of female models. So I was really impressed with that. And I think that diversity is something that's really good for the photography show to keep pushing.
Frankly, yeah, interesting, yeah. In terms of other industry news, you mentioned that new Fujifilm camera. There's rumours that there's going to be a new Sony camera announced next month, which allegedly is going to be the A1 Mark II. I don't know if you've seen that. I think it's the same sensor. They're just going to give it a bit of an update in terms of the software, probably improve the focusing even more.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's going to be a new sensor in it because it's still that 50 meg stack sensor.
Yeah.
So obviously there'll be a flood of second-hand A1s on the market, which might be quite a nice buy for anybody looking for something for weddings. I don't have an A1, but I know a lot of people do and swear by them for weddings and other work as well, of course. So
one of the downsides, well, in fact, I say one of the downsides of being VAT registered. I'm trying to think of an upside, so there's no upside. But one of the issues being VAT registered is that there's the second-hand market isn't really a logical thing to dip into because you might as well get it new. But I do need to, as we've spoken before, I do need to look at replacing my camera bodies. I'm kind of waiting for the. I don't think I need an R5 for weddings, but the A7V I'm interested to see.
Probably next year.
That has,
next year.
See if I can limp on until then.
So, from a techie point of view. Neil, what have you come up with for this week? Anything new? Any thoughts on that?
Not really. The only thing I've been looking at this week is there's been a couple of workshop clients of mine that have had issues with memory, working out how much memory they're just using. Things are going slow, and when things are going slow, so computer memory, typically with Mac, and whenever things are going slow in Lightroom, this was some Lightroom Classic clients. It's always the same thing. It's always the previews file that's just huge, and delete that, and suddenly they're up and running. But it is a worthy reminder that people are often being advised to look at Open Activity Monitor on their Mac, look at the memory, how much memory is free, and Macs just don't work like that. So Mac, whatever memory you've got in there, it will eventually become no bytes free because that's how it works. A few years ago, they changed the architecture so that if you're running a program like say Photoshop, then you close it, it will keep all of that stuff in RAM if there's space, because you might open it again. There's no point getting rid of it and then loading it back up again because that's slow. So it does, which does mean it's quite hard to judge how much actual RAM you're using. But if you're in a Mac, look at the memory pressure and the swap space used. That's the thing. If it starts using swap, then it means that you actually have run out of RAM.
It's using the hard drive,
Yeah, okay. so that's going to and from your SSD or whatever, and that's the time that it might be beneficial. In most Macs, though, of course, it's all bonded. It's all tough to upgrade. You have to choose it.
You can't now, not in modern Mac, can you? Are you a Mac or PC person, Tesni?
I am a Mac. I hate how expensive they are when you buy them, but they last me a hell of a lot longer than any Microsoft has. And I use a 4 terabyte external hard drive to keep any of my major things. And then I just have my recent archives on the computer, so they eventually get moved over to keep as much space as possible free.
Yeah, I'm one of those strange people. I use both. I'm on a Mac right now, but I also have got a PC, mainly because of my training business. Sometimes being in the PC world is convenient, but I know which I'd rather use, put it that way. I know, yeah.
What I love about Mac, when I moved to Mac years ago, the thing that I loved about it is never having a message saying something like FX71246C.dll not found. Something completely, you never get anything like that. Or, in fact, apart from price, in fact, the only downsides of a Mac system I can see between having lots of experience with the two is price is much higher on a Mac for the same spec. And if you're into gaming, there's just not the titles aren't there for a game. But that's not due to the power or the graphics. It's just that games manufacturers just don't don't see that as a big market. So
one of the things I was going to just bring up in this section, and it will also hopefully set up our next guest, which I'm going to come back to, is and this is weddings, unfortunately. But how much do you do flash work at weddings, and how much do you play around with flash modifiers if you do flash work?
I tend to I use Flash quite a lot.
Okay.
I'm not one of these photographers that uses Flash all the time. I know some do and create that sort of very, very contrasty look. Once the light's too low for me, not just to get the shot, I need a decent ISO. But if there's not enough contrast in the shot, that's where I bring my flashes out. I have a mag mod set up. for all of them. And for me, it just gives, I know it's not, you want the modifier to be as big as possible. In the studio, I've got these big soft boxes, which I'm using now. It'd be great if I could have those. If I had a larger team, if I had an assistant, I would consider bringing those because they're just as quick to put up. It's just a faff when I'm on my own. So these MagMod systems are just great, but they are quite small. And I do get the feeling that when I've got a flash, let's say I'm doing an off-camera flash with a couple. So I've dialed in lots of ambient light. I've got the background of the venue nice and warm. Then using flash to sort of, highlight the couple. Well, when my flash is 10 feet away, I know that MagMod's not really making much difference to the softness of the light. So having something bigger would be more useful. What about you? What do you tend to use?
Well, I've got a bag full of MagMod stuff as well, which I bought secondhand because I resented the price of buying the stuff new for bits of rubber and gel, frankly. But, I'm in this group called Flashmasters, and there's a guy in there who we hope they're going to have on the show at a future date called Alex Buckland, and he raves about these things. So this isn't going to work if you're on the audio-only version of the podcast, but it's called SNDV. It's a manufacturer, and I think they're a Korean company, but they've got a whole range of soft boxes which literally just pull up and they pop open.
Right. What, umbrella style?
Yeah, but the beauty of it is it literally just folds flat, and you just literally pull it and it clicks and then folds flat again. And I've been playing around. Well, I say I'm taking the photo. Poor old Samantha's having to hold the camera and the flash and the softbox, but just putting it on a boom and booming it over the couple for like a final sort of what I call the last picture of the day, really, where you've got a bit of outside lights and stuff, really. And I'm super impressed with it, really. So, but unfortunately, you can only get them on AliExpress, so you have to buy it from a Chinese company and import it, really, which I'm not massively keen on doing, but there's no other way of getting it. So, but strongly recommend it. I'll put something in the show notes about it, but I think it was 100 quid for a 2018 one.
And is it quite light? Because that's always the problem I find with any softbox. Like you're then thinking, right, are my flimsy stands that I just carry around at weddings, do I need to upgrade those? And suddenly
no, super light. And it's designed for like a V1 or an AD100 type. You can get different adapters, but the one I bought is literally for the round flash, and it's great for that. Really,
I hope they have different alternative channels to market then soon enough. It's very hard stuff like AliExpress. If you do any commercial work, I've done some work with SJP, sort of a big financial house, and for those sorts of clients, you do need to have an anti-slavery, modern slavery statement on your website, and that means analysing all of your supply chain. And as soon as you get something on AliExpress, it's just impossible. And then there's not to say that any of those people use AliExpress as an outlet are doing anything dodgy, but it's just impossible to sort of ascertain and prove that they have these.
That's a super important point. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, really important point. So. Let's wrap the show for this week. So next time, all being well, we're going to have, and I kind of set it up with that piece there, but we're going to have a guy called Neil Redfern on. So
excellent.
And hopefully his partner as well, Helen Williams. So Neil is a fantastic photographer, wedding photographer based up in Manchester, or I think he lives in Cheshire now. And he's super active on YouTube channels, wonderful, more geared towards other photographers these days. But they also run a community called flashmasters.co, and the work on that site is just off the scale. I mean, I'm in it, but I'm not a Flashmaster by any means. But he does an awful lot of podcasting and that. So all being well, he'll be on the show next time, and all being well, it would be both of them. It would be great to get them both on, talk a bit about what they do, and also a bit about the Flashmasters community. So
awesome.
Looking forward to that. Tesni, thank you ever so much again for being with us this week. It's been fantastic finding out about what you do. Absolutely love your work, and I also love the Peak District. It's my favourite part of the UK. So walking, landscapes, and good beer. So it all adds up nicely for me. So thank you ever so much for being with us again today.
Pleasure.
And Nick, as I don't normally give you a chance to say goodbye, do you want to say goodbye to the listener this time?
I do want to say goodbye to the listener, and thank you for listening. And do spread the word about the podcast and the Facebook group. We love doing this, and it's just really great to get the feedback that we get. Do leave a review on Apple or Spotify. I think do it on Spotify. They're really handy, just because it helps other people find the podcast. So
it does. It helps you not to win.
And you get I'll tell you what. I'll give a free gift to somebody that does the first Apple review. So get in there. But I've not specified what it is. But it'll be better. It won't be a camera, and it will be better than a bag of crisps. So
Tesni's on the phone already. She's ready.
No, it's got to be someone that's not been on the podcast.
Well, there's an incentive for your delisting to give us a review. In all seriousness, thank you for taking the time to listen to us today. We'll be back again in 2 weeks' time. Until then, happy photography, happy shooting, and we'll talk to you soon.
Goodbye.